This past July, I packed my bicycle into a rental vehicle and at about 1 a.m. started the drive from Ohio to Albany. It would take me about 8 hours, ultimately arriving at about 9:30 a.m. to begin my journey along the Erie Canal Trail from Albany through Rome, the birthplace of the canal, Syracuse, and finally to Buffalo. The Erie Canal Trail, following along the Erie Canal, is separated from traffic primarily and goes for a distance of about 360 miles. I plan to add an additional 250 miles to the end to ride from Buffalo along Lake Erie through Pennsylvania and along the north coast of Ohio back to my home in Huron. This final leg of my route would follow along the Adventure Cycling Association's Northern Tier route. The first day planned to be around 78 miles, starting in Albany, following along to Lock 15 in Fort Plain. Once I dropped off the rental, I rode down to the river. There were nice parks and paths that followed along the river. On this first day, I would experience some tire punctures. I have tubeless tires, and it seems that there was more than one puncture, as some sealed. It took me a bit to plug the leak, but otherwise I was good to go. The weather started off excellent. Sunny, not too hot. I'm certainly no historian with respect to the Erie Canal. But as I rode through it, one found that there were 3 bodies of water you might run into. Whether it be a river, whether it be the original smaller canal, or whether it be an expanded canal. Although it was forecast to be sunny throughout the day, by the time I got to Schenectady, rain had started to fall. I pulled over to let the worst of it pass, and it did. Along the Erie Canal, there's various locks, each of which one is supposed to be able to stay to camp for free. Each offers different facilities, some offering full running water and restrooms, some lacked water and some lacked restrooms. From Schenectady forward for the rest of the day, while there was a good portion of time that you would see the canals or rivers, there was also a great deal of time where the path ran along a highway. It was still a nice view, especially if you could tell your mind to tune out the highway. It was such a temperature that when I was in the shade, it felt chilly and I needed another layer, but when I was out of the shade, it felt hot. It was a good mix, though. When I got to Lock 15, I set up camp. There was another group of cyclists who were friendly and spoke about their journey going from west to east. On day 2, the plan was to ride to Lock 21, located just outside of Rome, New York. I packed up and headed out to go find a nice place for breakfast. I found that place in St. Johnsville, the Bridge Street Diner. It was an excellent breakfast. There's something special about their hash browns. I felt the scenery along day 2 improved, with fewer views of the highway and more views of the canal. It's also true that the pavement gave way to more gravel, which I quite frankly enjoy. On this day and several other days of the trail, I found that the actual bike path didn't align with the maps I was using. However, the signage was excellent, and it was rarely difficult to find out which direction to go. There were plenty of rabbits, birds, deer, chipmunks, squirrels, and especially geese along the whole path. Along the entire canalway, there were several small towns to arrive at and to freshen up with ice-cold water and snacks. My bike, a Surly Midnight Special, and its 650B tires was handling the gravel as well as it did the pavement. I normally plan routes with about 50 miles a day of riding. This provides some nice time for camping and relaxing in the evenings and stopping along the way. For this route, I was planning days of 70 miles or more. An advantage of following the canal, of course, is that it is primarily level. Not many hills to be concerned with. It seems most people ride the route from west to east, purportedly because that's the flow of the prevailing winds. I can only speak to the 5 days I was riding along it, but the prevailing winds weren't of a concern. Much of it, in fact, is fairly sheltered from trees. When I got to Rome, I stopped into town to get a dinner, a sub, and get some fresh water. I do have to say that while it's beautiful around Rome, Traveling along its roads to get to those places was a bit hectic. Not much shoulder space, curbs with no inclines, and fast-moving traffic. Lock 21 itself was rather beautiful, though. There'd been word that they didn't have running water or restrooms. They at least had the restrooms when I arrived. Porta potties. And I was well stocked with water. That evening, there was a young gentleman with his dog camping in a hammock who kind of kept to themselves. 2 women arrived later, purportedly having ridden a day of 80 miles or more, and several people were along the canal fishing and playing their country music. The next morning I awoke planning to ride to Savannah, New York, where there was a campground. This day was planned to be about 75 miles. My breakfast this day consisted of protein bars, a Cliff Bar, though I did get a chance to stop for coffee later. Just as the scenery of the second day seemed to improve over the first, the scenery of the third improved even further, becoming increasingly interesting. The weather was certainly warmer this day, but also very tolerable. Many people took advantage of the canal, whether it be to walk or fish or bike or boat. Arriving into Syracuse, the bike paths became more urban. They were well separated from the roads. And often, as with urban trails, you find a greater variety, I think, a greater variety of scenes and types of trails, winding along and through the city. I think one of the highlights was arriving to the lake and riding along it.
My eyes wide, I'll run and hide, seaside, and I never wanna go back. A long drive into the night.
After the lake, one rides up to the New York State campgrounds and in fact rides through it for a bit. They did have a nice fountain for filling water bottles, though.
Need help, all or nothing, nothing happened and I fell in. My eyes wide, I'll run and hide, seaside, and I never wanna go back. A long drive to the night.
My plan was to stay at the Rivers Crossing campground in Marina. This took me along some roads after I got out of Syracuse, and there were some hills.
A long drive to the night.
I took a slight detour close to Weedsport, where the Putnam side of my family used to have a home. My great-grandfather, Raymond Arthur, was born there, I believe, and his father, Arthur, lived there. And this is that home.
I'm fine, but I wish I never said that. I'm fine, but I wish I never said that. A long drive into the night.
I pulled into Weedsport and got a shake and a sandwich at DB's Drive-In, as well as a wrap to take back to the campground for dinner later. It's good food, and they were very friendly. The people at the campground were extremely friendly as well and very helpful. It was nice to be able to wash some clothes in their laundry and get a fresh shower. The fourth day would take me to Brockport. It was going to be about an 81-mile day. When I had originally made plans for the day, I didn't find a good camping spot around Brockport, so I reserved a stay at a hotel. After the fact, I found out that there was, in fact, a visitor center in Brockport where one could camp, and that it had showers. It was a little confusing getting from Rivers Crossing back to the trail, but I did it. It involved some more road riding. Although the trail as a whole followed the canal very closely, whether it be on crushed stone or sometimes paved. One thing with bicycle touring is you have to watch which days you're going to run into restaurants that are closed. Both in terms of my breakfast and lunch this day, I'd planned a couple stops, but both were closed on Mondays. I'd say on this day, my first real good cup of coffee was when I finally got to the hotel at the end of the day. Though much of the trail was fairly empty this Monday, I found that everyone I ran into this day, and in fact every other day, was extremely friendly. Whether it be when they were getting past, when they were passing me, walking, biking, or fishing. One thing I find interesting along the trails is to watch people with their dogs. Well, there's certainly people out walking their dogs. You get a variety of cyclists taking their dogs along with them in a variety of ways. In child trailers and baskets. I've seen them in backpacks. I've seen them running along with a cyclist. I have to say I tried that with my dog once, briefly. He went for a squirrel and I ended up with a broken wrist for not remembering to let go of the leash. Though these were longer days than I typically plan, and I was weighted down, though I tried to be light in that manner, I found that they went fairly well. Again, with the trail being fairly level, I imagine that helped. Brockport was a welcoming city to come to. It seemed to be geared towards cyclists, or at least cyclist friendly. The fifth day would be the final leg of the Erie Canal Trail for me before I set off heading home. So I'd be riding to Buffalo, about 78 miles on this day. The day started off with some fairly strong winds, and a storm did come in later. When it blew in, it was fairly quick, and I shared the small roof of an informational kiosk with another bike tourer. He was friendly, and it gave us the opportunity to chat. As that storm did pass, so did the winds gradually reduce, and the sun came out.
Hello.
During much of the trail, if you didn't run into geese, you ran into what they left behind. This day also had an increasingly wide variety of trail sections. Some following along closer to the trails, some on streets, some separated through parks. And into Buffalo, of course, I would find that they also became more urban. There were certainly people on the trail, but I'd say probably due to it being a weekday, I had much of the trail to myself. Approaching the larger river and more expansive views was pleasant. I had thought of stopping at the falls, whether it be on this day or the next, but it was a bit out of my way, and with this already ending up being a 78-mile day, I decided against it. As one comes into Buffalo and to Lake Erie, there are some beautiful locations along this trail. There are some wonderful spots where one could stop and sit and call it an end to the trail. I have to say that the ending spot, at least according to my maps, was anticlimactic. I wish I would have ended the trail along one of these earlier sections to look out across the lake and think of the trip I had just made. It was nice to pass the Peace Bridge, which I crossed several times going into Canada. And this is the image, what I call anticlimactic end of the trail. Only in terms of view, though. It was wonderful to get the trail done. This was the second night that I got a hotel, obviously with camping not being readily available in Buffalo. It was nice to, again, get a fresh shower, shave, get some laundry done, walk around and get a good dinner. This sixth day would start the second portion of my ride, from Buffalo to my home in Ohio. The Adventure Cycling Association produces, among other things, maps and routes across the country. You can purchase their maps or purchase the ability to download their routes by GPS, and that's what I did. This is a section of their northern tier. It ended up being a very nice route. There were some roads that were maybe a little more busy than I preferred, but even on those roads there was a very wide shoulder. It was obvious that the route had been well planned. I'd be riding this day to the Lake Erie State Park in New York. It would be about a 58-mile ride. It was nice to be able to ride along the lake much of the day. I was born and grew up on the lake, and it's comfortable to me. There were some small rolling hills, though I think anyone from any other part of the country wouldn't have even considered them hills. On the way to the campground, I stopped and got a sandwich, half of which I took back to eat for dinner later. I like my bike. I respect it. It's dependable. It works. It brakes when I brake. It shifts gear when I shift gear. The Lake Erie State Park is right on the lake. After setting up camp, I stopped down toward the beach for the views. The weather that day was fantastic. Sunny in the 70s. The forecast for the next day included 20 to 30 mile an hour headwinds and some storms. I plan to get to bed early and shoot out early as well to try to miss some of that. On this day, I would ride to North Fairfield and find the Virginia's beach and cottages to stay for the night. My plan to leave early, which I did shortly after 7 a.m. to beat the rain and storms, did not work. There were heavy storms and heavy rain to the point that cars were pulled over with their hazard lights on. At one point it was too heavy to go forward, but with the lightning and thunder I didn't feel comfortable standing under a tree either, and there was no shelter to be found, so I stood along the road as the rain just poured on top of me. Interestingly, that made it difficult to view my phone as it would immediately get wet and I couldn't control it with my fingers. Once I arrived in Erie, Pennsylvania, though, the rain did start to let up and you could tell that the weather was going to brighten up. I was surprised with the rain and storms how many other riders there were that day. There was a large group. I don't know if they were just out for a group ride or a supported tour. As I got near my campground for the night, I stopped at a dairy aisle, got myself a vanilla shake to cool down, and was glad to take off the rain jacket and start to dry out. The Virginia's Beach campground was nice. I had a very primitive cabin, essentially just a running water and a bed, but I felt spoiled in it. As nice of a campground as it was a bit splurging, especially with them requiring a 2-night stay, which I had to pay for. But I was glad I did. On the 8th day, I headed out with a goal to reach Geneva-On-The-Lake to the Geneva State Campground in Ohio. This would be my first day back in Ohio. It was going to be a short day, only about 38 miles. I took advantage of the cabin and the short day to move slowly in the morning, making myself some breakfast and coffee at camp. There was a nice breeze along the way, the sound of waves along the lake. The high was only in the upper 60s, which is a beautiful weather for riding. In addition to following the lake closely, the roads were peppered with little stores and parks to stop at. As one arrives into Ashtabula, you sense an increasingly touristy atmosphere. And in Geneva-On-The-Lake, it's all the more so. I grabbed my lunch and dinner to take back to the campsite at a little restaurant in Geneva-On-The-Lake where they allowed dogs in. It's a nice concept, although the dogs certainly spoke to each other while I ate. The 9th day would take me to Westlake, Ohio. It'd be about a 68-mile ride, eventually taking me through Cleveland. The weather was again perfect. Low 70s, sunny. The There were a variety of trails and towns and stores and parks. Although it took you into a more densely populated area for sure, it always felt safe to me. Again, compliments to the Adventure Cycling Association as well as Cuyahoga County for establishing some wonderful bike routes and paths. On the east side of Cleveland, one approaches the lake, and again, more parks. You go past Burke Lakefront Airport, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Great Lakes Science Center, and of course the Cleveland Browns Stadium. There's a nice, safe bike path to cross the Cuyahoga River, bringing you to the west side of Cleveland. And then pretty quickly find another bike path that takes you to Edgewater Park. The park that day was packed with people along the beaches. After getting a short rest at the park, I decided to keep moving.
How you doing?
Well, I wish I was riding a bike instead of standing there.
I asked that police officer how he was doing, and he explained he'd much rather be riding a bike. Heading west out of Cleveland, one comes first to Lakewood, which also has remarkable bike lanes and paths. I don't have as many compliments for the biking through Rocky River. The 10th day was going to be the final day of my ride. It's only about 40 miles from Westlake to Huron, Ohio. And again, it followed the lake most of the way. After leaving Westlake, one goes through Bay Village, Avon Lake. When I arrived at Avon Lake, it became clear storms were going to come through, so I pulled to safety in a shelter. A young woman heading across country had stopped there as well for a small chat. The rain came down heavy, though the storm moved through quickly, even if there were some water spouts to view as it did. The winds increased the rest of the day, but I knew I wasn't going far, so it wasn't much of a concern. As I was finishing this day, I was trying to think through the entire route. It was hard to imagine that I had just started in Albany some days before. It was overall a very enjoyable trip. There wasn't much to complain about: the weather, the routes, the paths, the people I met along the way and chatted with. I feared I'd be disappointed by having the journey come to an end. But that fear didn't materialize because it felt as though it was still part of me. It was nice to cross the Huron River, go through downtown Huron. I decided to ride past the lighthouse and call the end of my trip at Lakefront Park, and I'm glad I did.